The first time I opened the envelope, my heart sank. $30,000? $30,000? In fines for a cabin I had legally purchased outside their jurisdiction, far from their boundaries, and completely unconnected to their homeowners association. I stared at the official HOA letter, rereading every line, hoping it was a mistake. But no, it was real. They claimed I had violated community rules that didn't even apply to me. This wasn't just a fine. It was intimidation, a warning to bow down to authority that had no power over my property. My cabin sat on the edge of the forest, miles away from the nearest neighbor and well beyond the HOA's actual territory. When I bought it, I checked everything. Deeds, boundaries, county records. I was sure the place was mine, fully legal, fully independent. Yet somehow the HOA had decided that my ownership threatened them. Their leader, a woman with a reputation for ruthless control, had personally signed off on the fine. She didn't even hide it. They wanted me to know exactly who was behind this. I could feel my blood boiling, but I forced myself to stay calm. Reacting emotionally would only give them leverage. Instead, I started gathering evidence. Maps, deeds, emails, everything proving that my cabin was not under their control. Each piece of paper I collected strengthened my resolve. I realized this wasn't just about 30,000, it was about principle, about refusing to let a self-appointed authority dictate what I could or couldn't do with my own property. Within days, things escalated. Flyers appeared in nearby mailboxes claiming I had ignored community rules and devalued the neighborhood. Neighbors I hadn't even met started giving me suspicious looks. The HOA wasn't just trying to punish me, they were trying to shame me publicly, to make me back down quietly. But instead of fear, I felt determination. I knew that if I let them get away with this, others could fall victim to the same abuse. I called my attorney, explained the situation, and handed over every document I had. His eyes widened at the audacity of the HOA. This isn't just a civil dispute, he said. They are overstepping, and they could be held personally accountable. That's when the idea hit me. If they were willing to find someone outside their jurisdiction, maybe it was time to take the fight further than they ever expected. The legal system wasn't on their side. They had overplayed their hand. I looked out over the trees surrounding my cabin and realized the next few months were going to be a war of strategy, patience, and persistence, and I wasn't going to lose. The first step was to notify the HOA, formally, that I disputed the 30,000 fine. I drafted a letter, precise and professional, including copies of my deed, county records, and property maps. Every page was a silent declaration. My cabin was legally mine, and their authority ended at the boundary line. When I sent it, I knew it was just the beginning. I had to prepare for resistance. They didn't back down quietly. A few days later, I started receiving messages from the HOA board members. Some were passive-aggressive, hinting at consequences. Others were outright threats, warning me that ignoring community rules would not go unpunished. I read each one carefully, keeping a calm tone in my responses. My attorney reminded me constantly, do not escalate with anger. Let documentation and law speak for you. This advice became my mantra as tension mounted. Then the public shaming began. Flyers appeared in the local area with my name and photos of my cabin, accusing me of endangering property values and disregarding community standards. Neighbors I had never spoken to approached me, asking questions as if I had committed some serious crime. I explained calmly, showing the documents proving my cabin's location was outside their jurisdiction. Some accepted it, but others were influenced by the HOA's aggressive messaging. The most shocking moment came when the HOA held a small community meeting and publicly mentioned me by name. They claimed I had ignored warnings, refused to pay, and violated the spirit of the neighborhood. The room was silent except for the HOA leader's dramatic declarations. I was furious, but I didn't panic. My attorney suggested attending the next meeting, not to argue emotionally, but to present facts calmly and clearly. I realized that this battle wasn't just legal, it was also about reputation. Winning meant showing the truth, not just the law. Over the next week, I meticulously prepared. Every letter, every map, every recorded communication from the HOA was organized and time-stamped. I created a timeline showing how and when the fines were issued, proving their jurisdiction did not apply. I also documented the community shaming tactics. My goal was clear, to build a solid case that could withstand not just HOA claims but public scrutiny as well. By the time I received the notice that their leader was facing legal action, herself for mismanagement and harassment of homeowners, I realized something powerful. The overreach of authority always carries a risk, especially when it's personal. This fight had become bigger than me. It had become a cautionary tale about accountability, boundaries, and the limits of unchecked HOA power. I wasn't just defending a cabin. I was setting an example. The day of the first formal hearing, I felt a mix of nerves and determination. My cabin was still mine, legally and morally, but now I had to prove it in a courtroom. I arrived early, carrying folders packed with deeds, property maps, emails, and certified mail receipts. Each document represented weeks of preparation, a timeline of the HOA's overreach, and a record of my calm, methodical responses to their aggressive actions. The courtroom was small, lined with wooden benches, and the stern faces of neighbors, and a few curious onlookers. The HOA leader sat across the room, flanked by 2 board members, looking confident as ever. She smiled faintly when she saw me, as if assuming I would be overwhelmed by the formal setting. I returned the gaze with quiet resolve. My attorney whispered, "Let them make mistakes. Stick to the facts. Keep it professional." When the hearing began, the HOA's representative wasted no time. They recited a rehearsed statement, highlighting alleged violations, unpaid fines, and disregard for community standards. Their tone was forceful, almost theatrical. But when I presented my evidence, the room changed. The maps clearly showed my property was outside the HOA's boundaries. County records confirmed my ownership and independence from their jurisdiction. Emails revealed multiple attempts at intimidation and misrepresentation by the board. The truth was concrete, and it spoke louder than threats. The HOA leader tried to interject several times, but the judge remained patient, reviewing each document carefully. As each point was clarified, murmurs ran through the courtroom. Neighbors whispered among themselves, surprised at how aggressively the HOA had pursued someone who wasn't even under their authority. The leader's confidence began to waver. Her arguments became defensive and contradictory. Every claim she made that wasn't backed by documentation weakened her position. By the end of the hearing, it was clear that the tide had shifted. The judge asked pointed questions about jurisdiction and evidence, and it became impossible for the HOA to continue asserting authority over a property they did not legally govern. The leaders of the association squirmed, realizing that overreach had consequences, and that their reputation and credibility were on the line. As I left the courtroom, I felt a mixture of relief and anticipation. The legal battle was far from over, but the first crucial victory had been achieved. The HOA could no longer threaten fines or harass me without facing scrutiny. Their actions were now documented, their authority questioned, and their leader personally exposed to accountability. I looked out at the crisp mountain air, the forest beyond my cabin, and I realized this fight was bigger than a single fine. It was about fairness, accountability, and standing up when power is misused. And I wasn't backing down. After the first hearing, things escalated quickly, but in my favor. The HOA leader, once confident and untouchable, was now facing serious scrutiny. Word had spread about the courtroom proceedings. Neighbors, who had initially whispered and speculated, began asking questions and demanding proof. The more evidence I shared, the more cracks appeared in the HOA's armor. The fines were no longer just unreasonable. They were indefensible. The next move was strategic. My attorney advised me to document everything meticulously, anticipating potential retaliation. Every call, every email, every public post by the HOA was logged and timestamped. I knew from experience that these organizations often resort to subtle harassment when their authority is questioned. I was prepared. My cabin, my property, and my legal standing were all protected. The key was patience and precision. Meanwhile, the HOA leader's behavior became more erratic. Board meetings were called with little notice. Public statements were made online, and the fines were referenced in community emails. But each time, I had documentation ready to refute them. I stayed calm, letting the law and facts speak for themselves. For the first time, the HOA members were on the defensive, scrambling to justify decisions that were clearly overreaching. Then, the real turning point came. The HOA leader was personally named in a lawsuit filed by several homeowners for mismanagement and harassment. Suddenly, the focus shifted. The association could no longer hide behind its structure. They were forced to confront the consequences of one person's unchecked power. Their previous aggressive tactics now reflected poorly on them, both legally and socially. This opened a door. By staying methodical, calm, and thorough, I could continue to protect my property and expose the overreach of authority in real time. I also began reaching out to neighbors personally, sharing facts about jurisdiction and property boundaries. Many had believed the HOA's narrative, but when presented with maps and legal documents, their reactions changed. Conversations turned from suspicion to support. Some even volunteered to testify if needed. The HOA had underestimated the power of truth, and suddenly the narrative shifted. By the end of that month, the cabin felt safer, not just physically, but morally. The fight was no longer only about a fine. It was about accountability, transparency, and the limits of power. The HOA had overplayed their hand, and the first domino had fallen, their leader in court. For the first time, I realized this could serve as a cautionary tale to others. Misusing authority has consequences, and the more extreme the abuse, the more spectacular the exposure. Sitting on the porch, I watched the sunset over the trees, feeling the weight of the struggle lifting. I had taken the first major step in winning this battle, but I knew the final chapter was yet to be written. The final chapter of this battle unfolded quietly but decisively. Weeks of preparation, documentation, and calm persistence had built a mountain of evidence that the HOA could not ignore. The leader's lawsuit for mismanagement and harassment moved forward, and the implications were clear. The overreach that began with a $30,000 fine could now have serious personal consequences. This wasn't just about a cabin anymore. It was about accountability. On the day of the final hearing, the courtroom was tense. I arrived early, as always, carrying the same folders I had relied on for months. Maps, deeds, emails, certified letters, everything meticulously organized. The HOA leader sat across the room, her confident demeanor now visibly strained. Board members fidgeted in their seats, exchanging nervous glances. They had assumed that intimidation and aggressive tactics would suffice. But the law does not bend to arrogance. When the judge began reviewing the evidence, the weight of reality hit the HOA leader. Each claim she made was countered with solid documentation. My property was outside their jurisdiction. Their fines were legally unenforceable, and their attempts to intimidate me were recorded and verifiable. The courtroom shifted with every fact presented. What had been a show of authority turned into a display of their own mismanagement. I watched quietly as the judge asked pointed questions about the association's procedures, boundaries, and communications. The HOA leader struggled to answer, her words increasingly defensive. I didn't speak much. I let my attorney handle the statements. My role was to remain calm and observant, a witness to the unraveling of an organization that had misused its power. By the end of the hearing, the decision was clear. The judge ruled in my favor, dismissing the fines entirely and acknowledging that the HOA had exceeded its authority. More importantly, the leader herself was held accountable for her actions, facing restrictions on further harassment and legal repercussions for any future overreach. The board was now on notice that unchecked authority has consequences. Stepping outside, the crisp mountain air felt different. The tension that had dominated months of conflict was gone, replaced by a sense of vindication. My cabin, the place I had fought so fiercely to protect, remained untouched and legally secure. The experience had taught me more than the limits of HOA authority. It had shown the power of patience, preparation, and calm persistence in the face of intimidation. As I looked over the trees, watching the sunlight reflect off the cabin roof, I realized the story wasn't just about me. It was a warning to anyone who thinks power can be abused without consequence. And for the first time in months, I could finally breathe, knowing that standing firm had made all the difference.